All the footage you are about to see today was filmed in one of the most hostile and isolated regions on the planet. A region that sometimes requires you to face 20-meter waves and endure absolutely hellish gusts of wind just to get there. As inhospitable as they may be, these magnificent, sublime and intimidating landscapes are little corners of paradise. For animals that are 100% fascinating, sometimes made up of 40% fat, and who, between two gusts of wind, show you their tonsils. And for the penguins that gather in huge colonies, in these territories that are among the last wild sanctuaries on the planet, where nature still expresses itself without filters or labels. Wow.
No, forget it. I can't. There's too much wind. But before taking you to visit these lands lost in the southern hemisphere, I have to tell you about what an adventure it is to get there.
To reach this hostile and isolated territory, lost in the middle of the Crozet Archipelago, wedged between the wind belts of the roaring 40s and the furious 50s, it always starts with the Marion Dufresne, a legendary 120-meter oceanographic vessel which, 4 times a year, sets out from Réunion Island. A journey of nearly 8,000 kilometers to resupply the scientific bases established in the Crozet Archipelago, Kerguelen, and on Amsterdam Island. Invited by the French Southern and Antarctic lands, which manage these territories at the end of the world, I had the opportunity to join one of these journeys. And aboard this fantastic ship, we headed due south, towards the Southern Ocean. With each passing day, the air temperature drops by an average of 5 degrees, and as the thermometer keeps falling, the waves grow taller. After 4 days of sailing, we cross the symbolic line of the roaring 40s, and the Marion Dufresne moves forward, not faltering, riding over 8-meter swells. While the low, heavy sky seems to press down on the ocean like a lid. And then, the next morning, after nearly 5 days of sailing without seeing any land or any ship on the horizon, the first southern islands lost at the edge of the Indian Ocean finally appear. We spend an entire day carefully sailing along the forbidden volcanic islands, located to the west of the archipelago, whose reefs have caused more than one ship to sink throughout history. From the boat, a team of scientists takes off in a helicopter to take a rapid series of photos. Sharp ridges and jagged headlands gnawed by storms, in order to estimate the size of the impressive seabird colonies that nest between the cliffs of these sanctuaries. Because all these islands are strict nature reserves, where no human has set foot for decades. When we passed by, it had even been years since any boat had come near them. Without needing to set foot on land, as soon as you lay eyes on these steep shores rising out of a restless ocean, you understand that these islands are not deserted. Each one of them is the small capital of an animal empire made of flesh and feathers. Then, after a day spent along the impressive cliffs of these forbidden islands, whose landscapes seem to have been exiled to the edge of reason, we head west to reach Possession Island, the only inhabited island of the archipelago. Here, perched on a cliff, a research station was built in 1963. And since the island doesn't have any real port to speak of, you can only get there by helicopter. Once at the base, we are welcomed by the 40 or so people who live here, many of whom are in costume, as tradition dictates when the Marion arrives. When we arrived, it had been nearly 3 months since this small community of enthusiasts who came here to study and preserve these amazing lands had any visitors. During the 3 days we will spend on land, they will kindly take us out into the field.
The first thing that strikes you when you arrive here is that almost 1 day out of 3 the wind blows at over 100 kilometers per hour. And then there's also the rain. It rains about 300 days a year, and since it's currently 5 degrees, it actually feels more like -10. The second thing is that here the wildlife doesn't seem to see you as a threat at all. They treat you with obvious indifference. If the birds, like the marine mammals, seem to have no wariness towards us, it's because here on these islands there are no land predators.
Clearly, filming face cams in the southern islands is a real pain, so we'll stick to voiceover to discover the true inhabitants of the Crozet Archipelago. Because while no humans live here permanently, there are millions of seabirds and tens of thousands of fur seals and elephant seals, who always seem to accept your presence calmly and take hardly any more interest in you than if you were a rock. If the massive and placid elephant seals lying on the beaches look at you without fear or suspicion, it's because they know no threats on land. And when you get closer, most of the time they just give you a cautious glance, just to make sure you're not an orca, before going back to sleep. At most, a territorial male will sometimes let you know that you've ventured a little too close. All these magnificent animals are not naive. They are simply the product of a world that has evolved far from us. On the southern islands, the wildlife never learned to be wary of humans. For all these species, for millions of years, danger and death have come from the sky or emerged from the sea, but never from the land. Since we neither look like an orca nor move like a skua or a giant petrel, to them we are just part of the scenery. And the brutal episodes of hunting carried out by whalers throughout the 19th century in this part of the world were too brief for them to have time to adapt and learn to be wary of us. Fear is never innate, it's always an adaptation. For king penguins and elephant seals, panicking at the sight of us would be a useless waste of energy. But here in the far south, energy means survival. On these islands of animal innocence, we're also struck by the size of the colonies. Of the roughly 4.5 million king penguins in the world, nearly a third come to nest and breed in the Crozet Archipelago, where they gather in gigantic groups. In the smallest penguin colony, located nearly 6 kilometers from the research station, there are nearly 50,000 king penguins crowded together on just a few hectares. Meanwhile, the impressive penguin colony of Abbé des Marins, located below the base, is home to nearly 100,000. It's a way to appreciate the constant rumble produced by these thousands of overlapping animal voices. Let me let these feathered cities speak for themselves for a few seconds. In this colony, which has some of the highest densities in the world, the birds are so numerous that they literally invade the paths leading to the small jetty and the research huts built to study them. Come on, let me through, please. But you're too small, it's not working. They're stuck. Hello. If king penguins gather together like this to form feathered metropolises, it's both to minimize predation and because accessible beaches are relatively rare along their shore. So, unlike in the ocean, where life is scattered across the vastness, on land they crowd together. At first glance, these flightless seabirds, who march in procession and stand in tight rows, seem a bit clumsy and might give you the impression of being slightly ill-suited. But we forget that behind this awkward walk, like 8-year-olds disguised in black and white tuxedo plumage, and adorned with golden streaks like a necklace of sunlight, there is a body optimized for taking to the sea. Because once in the water, the streamlined, flipper-shaped wings of these birds, which have forgotten how to fly, turn them into real torpedoes. Sometimes, when divers from the French southern and Antarctic lands go down into these cold waters to retrieve tracking tags, the data from which will help refine the management plans of one of the largest marine protected areas on the planet, they briefly see missiles capable of staying underwater for nearly 10 minutes and diving where almost no scuba diver can go, down to 300 meters deep. In fact, king penguins spend most of their time moving around in the ocean, and less than a quarter of their entire lives takes place on land, where they mainly come to reproduce. During our visit, the vast majority of the colonies were incubating eggs. You can see them resting on the bird's feet and protected by a fold of skin. Once their single egg is laid, the parents take turns incubating it for about 50 days. And while one stays still, keeping it warm, the other sets off to travel for several days across the vast, steel-colored ocean, sometimes covering hundreds of kilometers in search of food before returning to take over. All the scruffy penguins covered in strange brown down, which helps them withstand the cold, are chicks that don't have their feathers yet. Here, they're called kiwis, and I think you can see why. After spending their first year of life on land, and once their plumage is complete, the young ones will leave the colony and head out to sea. As impressive as they are, these majestic seabirds, which can live for nearly 20 years, are only the most visible part of the bird diversity. Phenomenal, which has made its home in the Crozet Archipelago, sometimes called the land of 50 million birds. In fact, there are 4 times more seabirds on the Crozet Archipelago than there are Belgians on the entire planet. Everywhere you look, in the sky, on the cliffs, and on the beaches, you eventually come across one of the 36 species of seabirds that have made their home on these islands. If we were to evenly distribute the 50 million birds present on the 350 square kilometers of the archipelago, we would end up with nearly 70,000 birds per square kilometer. Among these 36 species, there are 4 species of penguins: the king penguins, but also gentoo penguins, macaroni penguins, rockhopper penguins, and 7 species of albatrosses, including wandering albatrosses. These giants, with a wingspan wider than that of a man and capable of crossing entire oceans almost without flapping their wings, simply by harnessing the power of air currents. And then there are also skuas and the impressive giant petrels. These opportunistic scavengers, recyclers of carcasses and egg thieves with a velociraptor-like gait, are often synonymous with death. When they roam through the colonies, the other birds move aside, faced with their chick-killer stare. They are the vultures of the Southern Ocean. Without their hyperacidic stomachs, capable of digesting decaying meat, the beaches of the archipelago would literally be overwhelmed with corpses. Here, accessible bays are so rare and sought after that penguins often have to share the space with massive, fleshy giants, southern elephant seals. Every year, 8,000 to 12,000 individuals come to rest and breed on the beaches of Crozet, which represents nearly 2% of the world population of the species. These graceful balls of muscle and fat with their teary, gentle eyes are literally everywhere. They can be found in large numbers in the heart of the colonies, among the penguins, but also in the rivers. And some even head up into the high ground to rest in pools of water. And when you move through these landscapes near the shore, it's not uncommon to have to go around these giants who are lazily lounging in the middle of the path. After being dropped off by helicopter in a wave-battered bay, located a day's walk from the base, we were surprised to be greeted by dozens of elephant seals resting in groups, all around the small scientific hut set up here to allow, among other things, for their study. When they are on the beach, their activity is limited to socializing or fighting on the spot. Exceptionally, they move a few meters before stopping to take a little nap, obviously tired from carrying so much fat. And the rest of the time, nearly 18 hours a day, they spend it staying still, motionless, knocked out. Elephant seals are not just big. They are a perfect balance of power, endurance, and insulation. Their body fat, called blubber, makes up to 40% of their total mass. Which means that in an adult male weighing 4 tons, there's nearly 1.5 tons of pure fat. In other words, a single elephant seal can contain as much blubber as an entire car filled to the brim with butter. This fat acts as a second skin and serves as a thermal barrier that protects them from the cold, while also providing an energy reserve they can draw from for nourishment. Because the individuals resting on the shore often stay there for several weeks, sometimes even months, without eating before returning to the ocean. When the babies are born, they are real bundles of cuteness. Here, they're called candies because orcas love them. At birth, the little ones weigh nearly 40 kilos. Fed by mother's milk, which is an energy bomb containing up to 50% fat, they gain 20 to 30 kilos per week. And after a month spent nursing, they are already 3 to 4 times heavier than at birth. And when the babies reach 120 to 160 kilos, they are then left on their own. And they will stay there, practically motionless, drawing on their fat reserves accumulated over a month and a half, while their muscles and respiratory systems develop. In fact, he wants to pass through, that's it. Once their bodies are finally ready to venture into the ocean, they will gradually slip into the water and learn, on their own and without any help, how to dive, hunt, and avoid predators. During this first year, only half of them will survive. Those will return to the beaches once a year to molt and later to reproduce. On Crozet during the mating season, on land it's war, and the beaches turn into arenas where the dominant males, the pashas, fight to get a harem. Mountains of muscle and fat, weighing over 4 tons, clash in incredibly violent fights to rule over a tiny empire made up of just a few dozen females. Even for those who, through their stamina, bulk, and tenacity, eventually manage to prevail, the price to pay is often terrible. Because these battles between giants as heavy as small trucks leave both the winners and the losers battered and covered in scars. So much so that in the wake of these battles, the life expectancy of the colossi often melts away like fat in the sun. And during the breeding season, many males die from the after effects of their injuries or from exhaustion. That's why their average life expectancy is twice as low as that of females. Just like penguins, these animals with their sumo wrestler-like appearance, slow and chubby, don't seem suited for life on land. Their heavy bodies are such a burden for moving around on land. But once they're underwater, their bodies move with the grace of mermaids. Footage of elephant seals diving is extremely rare, because these animals, capable of holding their breath for more than an hour, dive down to hunt squid and deep-sea fish in regions that are inaccessible to most of our submersibles. So, over the next few minutes, I'm going to need you to use your imagination. Because to illustrate their achievement, I can only show them moving near the surface, or just a few meters below. That's where the divers from the Marion Dufresne were able to capture a few images of these giants who came to greet them, before diving into the abyss to hunt as deep as 2,000 meters below the surface. One of the first extraordinary adaptations of these blubber-armored submarines is hidden in their large black eyes, which are calibrated to function in the dark depths of the oceans, in the midnight zone. Packed with rods, the cells specialized for very low light vision, their eyes allow them to detect the slightest contrast and thus identify the silhouettes of their prey with remarkable efficiency. Their thick, stiff, and highly innervated whiskers are covered with hydrodynamic sensors that allow them to perceive the microturbulences left by the movement of a fin or by the frantic flapping of a panicked prey. Perhaps even more astonishing, these mammals, which can spend 18 hours straight dozing when they are on land, only sleep about 2 hours a day on average once they are at sea. When they need to sleep, to avoid being eaten by orcas and other great white sharks that hunt by sight near the surface, the elephant seals dive down to the twilight zone and reach depths of 200 meters. There, Where the darkness hides them, they finally allow themselves to sleep. Their muscles relax, their heart rates slow down to as low as 5 beats per minute. Their blood vessels constrict to concentrate blood around their organs, and their brains shift into deep sleep. Their massive bodies then stop swimming, and they sleep while slowly sinking in a spiral. After naps lasting an average of 10 to 30 minutes, and once they've reached around 800 meters deep, they wake up, hunt a bit, and return to the surface to fill their lungs. By equipping elephant seals, as well as penguins and fur seals, with GPS trackers, we have discovered over the past decades that these exceptional divers, who go out to sea for entire months, often travel truly staggering distances within the Southern Ocean. So, it's not uncommon for an individual to swim thousands of kilometers to feed during a single migration. You can see in this animation the distances covered by 21 elephant seals from the Kerguelen Archipelago and the Antarctic coast in just 4 months. During their hunting phase, these animals do not search for their prey randomly. They target specific areas where oceanic fronts meet and where krill and fish are concentrated. And they are even able to remember their most successful dives, often returning at the same times and depths to take advantage of them. And this incredible ability to reach areas that are practically impossible to sample regularly with ships or robots means that king penguins, with their tuxedo-like silhouettes swaying in the horizontal rain, just like the elephant seals dozing on their shores, are not just subjects of study. They also sometimes contribute to a better understanding of the unique dynamics of the Southern Ocean. Because the devices they carry, which can measure temperature, conductivity, and depth, allow us to gather data that would be extremely difficult to collect without them. After another day spent in the company of these fascinating animals, we begin the 4-hour walk that separates us from the research station. Moving through these landscapes, as magnificent as they are desolate, where the powerful winds prevent any trees from growing, the imagination goes into overdrive. For those who come to spend several months, sometimes an entire year, on these islands that are practically cut off from the world and located nearly 2,500 kilometers from any permanently inhabited land, the relationship to risk is unique when you venture far from the base. Because the isolation and the hellish conditions of these environments leave little room for error. In winter, as in summer, the weather changes quickly and the conditions can be terrible. And if something happens to you out in the field, once the Marion Dufresne has left, no helicopter will come to get you. An expedition will have to be organized to come and get you and bring you back by sheer muscle power, probably after days of effort, all the way to the small hospital at the base. And if the nature of your illness can't be treated on site by the doctor and the equipment he has, then what? On this archipelago where no plane can land, you'll have to hold on for at least another 10 days before a boat can come to get you and take you to a modern hospital. Back at the base again at the end of the day, everyone is busy. There's a buzz of activity. 3 months' worth of food supplies are being unloaded. Meanwhile, in the sky, the helicopter keeps making one logistical flight after another. In the distance, you can see the Marion, our lifeline to civilization. The only ship for thousands of kilometers in any direction. And behind it, drowned under the clouds, East Island appears like a dream, overshadowed by a highway of clouds. The last mission that was authorized to venture for a few hours into this strictly protected reserve dates back to 2007. Since then, no one has gone there. Given the isolation of these islands, far from major shipping routes, and considering the harshness of their climate, one might think that this archipelago has been partly preserved from large-scale exploitation. Yet, the biting winds and cold currents that make navigation in these seas difficult have not completely dampened attempts at conquest. First sighted in 1642 by a Dutch exploration ship drifting amid the dark tempests of the Southern Ocean, the archipelago remained a geographic ghost for more than a century. Then, in 1772, the French navigator Marion Dufresne, who set out in search of the mythical southern continent, dropped anchor near East Island. Following this first incursion, other expeditions came to the region to exploit the innocence of its wildlife. It was the beginning of the carnage. It is estimated that during the 19th century, about 150 ships anchored in the archipelago to slaughter on its shores hundreds of thousands of fur seals and elephant seals. They were hunted for their skins and fat, which, once rendered, were used on the other side of the world to lubricate machines and fuel oil lamps. Then, starting in the 1870s, this industry of slaughter gradually died out, because the collapse of the populations of marine mammal colonies drastically reduced the profitability of expeditions venturing to these remote islands at the end of the world. Especially since, at the same time, the advent of petroleum gradually relegated animal oil to the status of a relic from another era. Today, in the middle of the base, there still lies a large metal tank, a silent witness to this dark period in history. Since the end of these deadly operations, the colonies of marine mammals have recovered. Almost exterminated at the end of the 19th century, the fur seals now number about 15,000, having made the archipelago their home. Much more territorial and aggressive than elephant seals. Here, we learn to be wary of them. After having long plundered, destroyed, and destabilized, man no longer comes to these territories to exploit them, but to try to repair them, to better understand, preserve, and protect them. France, the guardian of this archipelago, has included it in a marine protected area that covers millions of square kilometers of ocean. And the small group of about 30 people, scientists, engineers, and technicians, who take turns running the scientific station that hosts us, and who face the same storms as the seals and penguins. They continuously collect data in the field that allows us to monitor the health of the subantarctic ecosystems. And they help feed the major atmospheric circulation models of the southern hemisphere. As for the immense animal colonies, they have become sentinels of climate change, indicators of the health of the Southern Ocean. By studying these territories, we sometimes even come across astonishing mysteries. One of the most fascinating, which researchers from around the world have studied, is that of the Crozet killer whales, some of whose pods have learned, in a way, to hack our fishing technologies and use them as automatic fish dispensers. In this remote archipelago, many killer whales have indeed developed a spectacular hunting method that involves following the Patagonian toothfish fishing boats and dismantling their lines one by one, feeding on the fish directly from the hooks. This behavior, which is learned socially and passed on between individuals, is so widespread in the region that technical solutions had to be found to limit this depredation, which can account for more than 20% of the fishermen's lost catch in the Crozet area. Equally strange is the mystery of the near disappearance of a mega colony of penguins on the legendary Île aux Cochons, which we passed by when we arrived at the archipelago. On this island, which gets its name from the fact that in the 19th century, seal hunters introduced pigs there to serve as a meat reserve for themselves and for possible castaways. For several centuries, there was a wildlife capital populated by 1 million king penguins. This made this feathered city the largest colony of this species on the entire planet. And then, at the end of the 1990s, when the island had already become a sanctuary, satellite images began to show a collapse of the wildlife metropolis that was as massive as it was sudden. In just 2 decades, 90% of the colony disappeared. To explain this disappearance, which was as brutal as it was sudden, diseases or introduced predators such as cats and mice, which arrived on the island over the previous centuries via passing ships, were suspected for a time. But no large-scale predation or mass deaths linked to pathogens were found. Today, it is believed that such a collapse may have been caused by changes in ocean temperature due to a particularly powerful El Niño event, amplified by global warming. Because while for us, 1 more degree in these cold waters may seem insignificant, For these animals, it's a mechanism that falls apart. Because the warming of the water influences the dynamics of the currents, which shape the distribution of nutrients that determine where the fish are found. For penguins, sea lions, or elephant seals, one more degree potentially means extra days of travel to reach a fishing area that has moved back by several hundred kilometers. And this threatens the survival rates of the young ones who, in the colony, wait with empty stomachs for their parents to return. For us, after only 3 days spent on this little corner of the world, it's time to head back out to sea. We are leaving Possession Island, taking with us the few scientists and field staff who, after spending nearly a year of their lives on this little colorful base, lost in the middle of an empire of birds and marine mammals, have completed their mission. Those who stayed on the island won't have any visitors for 3 months. Far from civilization's hustle and bustle, driven by dreams of faraway places, by a thirst for adventure and a hunger for a richer, more intense life, they will continue in these fabulous landscapes to care for this wilderness, with its overwhelming innocence, while trying not to get swept away by a gust of wind. Before plunging into the Southern Ocean, we skirt the cliffs of East Island that rise up in the midst of the turmoil. It's possible that these cliffs, which in some places drop more than 1,000 meters into the ocean, are the highest sea cliffs on the planet. But this record drifts like a polar rumor. No one has yet climbed to their summit to precisely measure the angle of the slopes of this sanctuary. And the data we have from satellites is imprecise. And I can't help but imagine the thoughts that crossed the minds of the first navigators who saw the dark silhouettes of these basalt citadels standing out against a leaden sky. On the coasts of Possession Island, sailors gave a promontory the name Cape Deception. A bitter disappointment for those who hoped to find a sheltered cove beyond, but were met instead by a rocky deception, a wall of rock battered by the icy swell. On East Island, between the steep cliffs hidden by foam and storms, there is a place called Shipwreck Bay. Many of those who ventured into these territories, whether to exploit them or simply to explore, sometimes paid for it with their lives. Because for a king penguin or an elephant seal, these small patches of land are little corners of paradise. For those who have been sailing for weeks, seeing nothing but the horizon, catching sight of Crozet is a relief that can also make you sink. Often hidden by thick fog, these lands surrounded by poorly charted reefs are approached with the same fear as a legendary beast. And every island in the region has had its share of dramatic shipwrecks. In 1821, British seal hunters were shipwrecked on these reefs, and the 15 surviving sailors spent nearly 2 years on Possession Island and East Island, surviving exclusively on raw meat from marine mammals and birds. In 1825, after weathering a storm, a French schooner was in turn smashed against the rocks of East Island, and the crew members were left to fend for themselves for 18 months, until a ship that was unaware of the archipelago's existence happened to pass by and rescued them. 50 years later, in 1875, a British 3-masted ship sank on the reefs of the Apostles. The 44 survivors spent 205 days there, living off albatross eggs on the cliffside before being rescued. 5 of them died there from the cold. But the most well-known of the 7 shipwrecks that occurred in the archipelago during the 19th century is by far that of the French 3-masted ship Tamaris, which in 1887 struck a reef near Penguin Island before sinking there. 13 sailors then managed to reach Pig Island. There, they discovered a cabin and some supplies that had been left 7 years earlier by another ship to help any possible castaways. Hoping to get noticed, the men then came up with the idea of turning an albatross into a message in a bottle by tying a distress message engraved on a can lid around its neck. The giant bird would be found dead 7 weeks later on a beach in Western Australia, its message still tied around its neck. The local authorities then contacted London by telegraph. The British informed the French, who launched a rescue expedition from Madagascar. And when it arrived on the scene, 10 months after the shipwreck, it found in a hut a note written by the sailors explaining that they were going to try to reach, using a makeshift boat, Possession Island, located 100 kilometers away. They were never found there. In fact, sailing in these poorly charted seas was so dangerous in the 19th century that the Royal Navy regularly sent a ship there just to check if there were any new castaways on these islands. After taking one last look at these sanctuaries disappearing behind us on the horizon, we head into the deep blue, not without a certain apprehension, as its color turns to black. Heading toward another end of the Earth, the Kerguelen Archipelago, located 1,300 kilometers from here. 2.5 days of sailing on an ocean swollen with massive waves separate us from it. During the first trip last year, the Marion Dufresne faced a storm in this part of the world with waves as high as a 4-story building.
Damn, no, damn.
In the next episode, we will go explore Desolation Island, the largest of the sub-Antarctic islands, and visit an old abandoned seaside resort near the Roaring Fifties. Right here, you will find a link to the videos we made with the French Southern and Antarctic lands, which introduce you to the work of the women and men who live on these islands and make it possible for these small communities at the end of the world to function. But also to explore behind the scenes of the Marion Dufresne and the adventures involved in such a sea voyage. And if you enjoyed this episode, think about sharing it and leaving us a little comment. The YouTube algorithm has gotten a bit crazy, and big projects like this one unfortunately often have little visibility.
It's gelatinous. It's huge and floppy, that's it. Yeah, there's muscle underneath, but I'm so surrounded by no because I'm fine. Well, I'll stay like this. You're kidding! In this hostile and isolated region, practically continuously swept by the winds, and where millions of people live, and where millions of birds live.
Start again from the beginning. Start again from the beginning. Sorry.
But honestly, you could just get a shot because it's... If I told you everything, it might be funny.
Go ahead. We'll start over and I'll film it at the same time.
I'll start again.